This week for my film project, I had Young Frankenstein, and I'm looking at the cinematic elements that allow this movie to be funny. That I picked to use is one very close to the beginning. It is when Frankenstein is going back and forth with one of his students in the classroom. The element that kind of adds to the comedy, at least for me, is how well the camera flips back and forth between Frankenstein and the student. It kind of shows the struggle that Frankenstein is having trying to explain it to him, and how much the student is pushing him to get the answer that he personally wants out of him. I then like the fact that Frankenstein gets so frustrated and starts throwing things around. This is why I used this image. It just shows that it really got to him, and he really, at this point, wants nothing to do with his grandfather, but still has to deal with his name. The next scene that I decided to use is when Frankenstein meets Igor, not Igor. I like this scene because it is funny. Igor going back and forth with Frankenstein, talking about his first name versus his last name, and that, it kind of has some of the same sounds, but Frankenstein changed it up just because he doesn't want to be called Frankenstein. And then Igor then changes his name from Igor to Igor just to mess with him. I think that the camera angles play well with this because it zooms in on Igor's face more than you would normally see, just to focus on how off he looks and his facial expressions while he's talking to Frankenstein. I think it adds a little bit to that whole scene of them going back and forth, and I think it makes it funnier. The next scene that I decided to use is very soon after the last scene that I just gave an example of, where he meets the girl in the wagon. I can't remember her name, but it's funny how she is basically a child. The camera angles play to that when she's rolling around the hay in the back of the wagon. There are a couple other examples of her acting like a child, but she kind of comes across as a 5-year-old who's not very intelligent. So I think going back and forth between Frankenstein's facial expressions when he sees her, going back and forth between that and what she's doing, I think it's pretty funny. It's pretty funny. I chose this next scene because every single time they show her face or say her name, lightning strikes out of nowhere, whether it's inside a building or not, and the horses scream and jump up and down like they're scared of her name. It only shows the horses doing this twice, I believe, but the movie still lets you hear that the horses are crying every time they hear her name, and the lightning is inside the building. I think that just showing the close-up and how almost creepy she is when she is first introduced makes things with the lightning and the horses a little bit funnier. This next scene is when Frankenstein finally gets to the castle. He first gets there, and the camera angles make it very clear that he is not talking to her as he is helping her out of the wagon, but when he makes a comment about something about those are big, or I can work with those, something like that, she thinks that he is talking about her based on where his face is, and he just doesn't respond to her at all. But the camera made it very, very obvious that he literally was not paying attention to her at all and was having a completely different conversation, and she thought it was about her, and I found that kind of fun. I think that everything about this picture is fun. This is the first scene where the big picture of Frankenstein's grandfather is shown. Every time that it is shown, the camera tends to get closer and closer and closer to his face. It always seems like something's about to pop out from the picture, but it really never does. So I think that's funny, and it's a nice play on like a haunted house kind of thing. And I think it was kind of creative of the director to do that. In this scene, Frankenstein is having a nightmare. We are meant to think that it is a very serious nightmare when, in fact, he is just having a nightmare about his name and who he's related to. The way the camera rolls kind of over to him makes us think that he is, in a world of hurt, world of panic, and it's really just about his name and him not wanting to be a Frankenstein. It's kind of funny how much it affects him, being a Frankenstein versus a Frankenstein. The next scene is when they find that there is a secret room or a secret hallway behind one of the bookshelves, and they are trying to figure out how to open it. The trigger is a candle, and they can't figure out how to get back and forth between the two, and he ends up getting stuck and looking like an idiot, honestly. It's kind of funny. The face is kind of funny. That whole scene, that whole play on with the door and how they react to each other is pretty funny, and the camera allows you to see just enough that it's still funny. Honestly, I just found this face hilarious. The camera was way zoomed in on him, and the light was like bleaking his face, and his eyes were wide open, and his mouth was hanging open, and I just found it hilarious. It was kind of unexpected that he'd give you that look, but I just found it hilarious, and it just kind of clicked right to that face, and it was funny. The last scene that I picked is when they get down into the lab and see everything that's been going on, and they start working. I find it kind of cool and kind of funny at the same time that we were shown their reactions to finding the lab and to what was going on and to what was down there. But we did not know what was down there, so we saw their reactions, and then we were allowed to see our own reactions. I thought it was kind of funny because it was a little overdramatic, but kind of cool at the same time. That is the end of my project on Young Frankenstein. I hope it was enjoyed and that I explained the comedy elements well enough for everyone to understand how this movie was funny.